Epsom Downs, where the race is run, was originally a spa at the beginning of the 17th century, but its popularity died as it was abused by many people, and it became a little bit run down as a spa. But during this time, a great deal of hawking and hunting and racing took place, particularly during the reign of Charles II. Regular spring and summer meetings were established as far back as 1730, but the real turning point in Epsom's history as a sporting centre came in 1773 when the 12th Lord Derby, then aged 21, took over the lease of the Oaks, a country house on the outskirts of Epsom, and he took it over from his uncle by marriage, General Burgoyne, a well-known figure in American and English history at the time. The Oaks was part of a property that the Lambert family had owned for over 500 years. When the General first took a fancy to it, the Oaks was nothing more than a primitive alehouse, but he spent a lot of money on improvements and eventually converted it into a comfortable home. Burgoyne is more widely remembered in the United States than in England, as it was he who surrendered Saratoga to the rebels in the War of Independence. An illegitimate son of Lord Bingley, he was stationed as a young officer in Lancashire, and while there he met and fell in love with Lady Charlotte Stanley, daughter of the 11th Earl of Derby. Lady Charlotte's family were greatly displeased when she married Burgoyne, who, however, was a man of considerable wit and charm, and in due course was accepted and even regarded with affection by his wife's relations. The 12th Earl of Derby succeeded his grandfather. His father, who insisted on calling himself Lord Strange, though he had no claim to that title, had been a member of the Jockey Club and had done well both for himself and for his descendants by marrying the daughter of an extremely rich man, Mr. Hugo Smith. The 12th Earl, popular, hospitable, easygoing and self-indulgent, devoted to racing, but even more so to cockfighting, married Lady Elizabeth Hamilton, sister and heiress to the 7th and 8th Dukes of Hamilton, when he was little more than a boy. To celebrate his engagement, he organised a magnificent fete at the Oaks. The programme included amateur theatricals and the Masque the Maid of the Oaks, written by General Burgoyne. Unfortunately, the marriage proved an unhappy one, and after a son and 3 daughters had been born, the Earl and his wife parted. It was generally expected that the Earl would sue for divorce, but he declined to do so, being determined that his wife should not be free to marry her lover, the Duke of Dorset. The marriage, therefore, remained undissolved until Lady Derby died in 1792. 6 months later, the Earl married Miss Farron, an accomplished actress and a very amiable woman as well, although she did draw the line at cockfights staged in her drawing room. The Earl entertained in great style, both at Knowsley, where more good ale was drunk than in any servants' hall in England, and also at the Oaks. He almost killed his chef by demanding late suppers, and when that unfortunate man was inconsiderate enough to remonstrate, he was airily told to put down a fixed sum to wear and tear of life. At Epsom races, the Earl invariably acted as steward and used to invite a party of friends for the week. The May meeting of 1778 was of the traditional type, being composed entirely of races run in heats over 2 to 4 miles. Possibly inspired by the example of the St. Leger, which had been instituted 2 years previously, Lord Derby and his friends decided to enliven proceedings by founding a race for 3-year-old fillies, to be called the Oaks, and to be run the following year over 1.5 miles. At this period, the great majority of races were for mature horses over at least 2 miles, but there was a growing tendency, particularly in the north, to race horses younger and to encourage the development of speed by matching them over a shorter distance. There were 17 subscribers at 50 guineas each for the first Oaks. 12 fillies took the field, and appropriately enough the race was won by Lord Derby's Bridget, who started favourite. The experiment was considered a success, and another 3-year-old race, this time for both colts and fillies, was run over 1 mile, and this was proposed for the following year. This distance was increased to 1.5 miles in 1784, and that's been the distance, of course, of the Derby ever since. The archives at Knowsley throw no light at all on the details of the founding of this race, but the story goes that a toss of the coin decided whether it should be named the Derby Stakes, or alternatively the Bunbury Stakes, after Sir Charles Bunbury, the foremost racing man of the day, who is staying at the Oaks. It seems at least equally probable, though, that the guests at the Oaks insisted that the race should be named in honour of their host. As the late Lord Rosebery said a century later, a roistering party at a country house founded 2 races and named them gratefully after their host and his house, the Derby and the Oaks. Seldom has a carouse had a more permanent effect. Well, the first race was won by Sir Charles Bunbury's horse, Diomed. I suppose that was fitting after he'd lost the toss. Now, Diomed had a very big influence on racing, especially in America. The horse was sold at the age of 21 for 1,000 guineas to Captain John Holmes of Virginia. And this looked a stiff price to pay for an elderly and somewhat discredited stallion. But the Colonel's judgment was vindicated in no uncertain fashion. Not only did Diomed live for another 10 years, but he founded a dynasty, and from him are descended many of the greatest horses, such as Lexington, in American racing history. When at last he died, there was as much grief among the horse-loving Virginians as there had been at the passing of George Washington, and his death was regarded in the light of a national catastrophe. So there's some of the earlier history of the race, and it's potted with some very good stories right through until the present day. And just to finish off about Sir Charles Bunbury, who was probably one of the leading influences in racing at the time, and of course was responsible in many ways for the founding of the race. His name is still remembered at Newmarket for the Bunbury Mile. He was at one stage Chief Secretary for Ireland, and he played an important part not only in the development of English racing, but even more so in the gradual extension of the authority of the Jockey Club, of which he was regarded as the perpetual president. His word became law on the turf, and it was his action after the in-and-out running of the Prince of Wales horse Escape that led the Prince, who was afterwards George IV, to shake the dust of Newmarket off his heels for good. Bunbury had 3 Derby winners, Diomed, Eleanor and Semerensko.